Random encounters, how do you use them in a campaign? Personally, I think they are an excellent tool for any DM. So today, we're going to go ahead and discuss the 4 different types of random encounters, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to make your random encounters not only more exciting for the players, but how you can tie them into the campaign and the story as a whole. So the first thing we're going to discuss is the different types of random encounters. Now I consider there to be 4 different types of random encounters. The first being combat encounters. The second, verbal encounters. The third, kind of a symbiotic relationship between the two. And then the fourth being an encounter without an encounter. What exactly is that? We'll get to that in a little bit. Now the first one is combat encounter. Now that's the most commonly used one that there is in Dungeons & Dragons. I think everybody pretty much uses them. It can be as simple as a pack of wolves attacking the party while traveling through the forest, or a patrol of orcs walking through a mine when you're trying to get a rest. There's a ton of variations of random encounters that you can use that are combat related. The second one is going to be verbal encounters, because keep in mind, not all random encounters have to end up in a fight. A lot of things can be handled by diplomacy through dialogue, and this is why we have the charisma score, or part of the reason why we have that. That's what makes bards valuable, sorcerers, any class that may have a high charisma. They typically should be, and not always have to be, but someone with a high charisma should typically be the one to speak for the party, and they're the ones who can maybe get you out of a sticky situation, or get information that's needed in a situation. And remember, an encounter doesn't have to be confrontational, it can just be situational. And by using that charisma score, they can go ahead and discuss things, talk things out, and maybe avoid any unnecessary combat. The third one is kind of a combination of the two that can go back and forth. So a verbal confrontation where you're trying to solve it with diplomacy can just turn sour. I mean, we've all had that. Someone's trying to discuss things with the local guards. The barbarian steps in and, "I would like to rage," and then you know the rest. So that does happen from time to time. Sometimes we have those barbarians that are just a little too aggressive, or just party members in general. It doesn't always have to be a barbarian. Or vice versa, you have a situation where you're in a physical confrontation, you're in a combat situation, and you have killed all the enemies, and then all of a sudden the last one throws himself on the ground, pleads to the party to let him live, and then you work out a little something where you get some information from him that can aid the party down the line. Or you may have a situation where you're in combat, you've killed everybody off, the last one tries to flee, you guys catch him, tie him up, bind him, put him in a corner, and you try and force information out of him. So everything, again, doesn't have to be solved by combat. Everything doesn't have to go perfectly and smoothly and be solved by words. Now the fourth one is what I like to call an encounter without having an encounter. So the best way I can describe this one is to just give you an example. Imagine the party just finished a very tough battle. They're low on hit points, they've used up pretty much all their spell slots, and they're in dire need of a long rest. They're traveling down a road on the way to a village, but it's too far for them to continue at this point without that long rest. So they move off the road into the forest slightly and set up camp for the night. Of course, they're going to go ahead and take watches 2 at a time to try and get them through the night. During the second watch, all is quiet, and then all of a sudden they hear in the distance horses coming along. Then they hear voices along with those horses, and they realize that a patrol is out. So the ranger uses his stealth and sneaks up a little bit to try and get a better eye. It's definitely enemies. It's a goblin patrol or an orc patrol, whatever you want to have. He comes back to the camp, discusses this with the wizard. They wake up a few of the other party members, and now they need to discuss and try and figure out what they're going to do, because now that patrol has actually stopped on the road roughly where they came off into the woods. So they've got to make a plan. So this is something I love to do to cause a sense of urgency to the group, make them think, and make them have a discussion with each other and try and figure out what they need to do. And it can be something as simple as the wizard walking up through the forest and casting silent image on the road out in front of them to get the search party's attention and make them walk off in that direction. Wizard comes back to the party, they got them to go off up the road, and hopefully an encounter avoided. So let's go ahead and discuss some reasons why we have random encounters in a campaign. So the first one is going to be to break up long journeys. We know that journeys always happen in Dungeons and Dragons. It's a part of the game. It's how you travel from one village to the next, and these journeys can be long. So it's a good way to break up a long journey and add a little excitement in there. So another use for random encounters is to assist the party, and it can be in any way, typically an NPC. I've thrown in a couple of NPCs myself in my homebrew campaign. One is a friendly werebear, another one is a satyr, to help the party along. People that know a little bit about the land and can give the party information or maybe point them in the right direction. Another thing I like to do with random encounters is make sure that the encounter matches the terrain and the environment that the party is currently in. Depending on if it's woods, mountain range, if they're on the water, if they're in snow-capped mountains, whatever the case may be, make sure that the encounter makes sense. It adds more realism to the encounter and makes it more believable to the party, and that just adds to the overall experience of the encounter. Another way to incorporate random encounters into the world is because it's just that, it's a living, breathing world. Everything doesn't revolve around the adventurers, so other things are going on. There are consequences to their actions. Case in point, my party, when they arrived in the land that I created called Karush, they got into an altercation after some gambling with some gnolls and ended up killing the gnolls. I took advantage of that situation and created an encounter for way down the line that I didn't drop on them till later on. They were traveling from one village to the next, and all of a sudden they came across this gnoll. He looked over the party. He paid close attention to a couple of the party members, but the party members didn't think too much of it. He gave them directions, helped them a little bit, and then went on his way. Well, little did the party know that he was actually a scout and was looking for a description that fit some of the party members. So down the road a little further, what happens? An ambush happens. And it is the gnolls that were searching for them who were friends with the gnolls that they had murdered. So I like this because it did a couple of things. First and foremost, it made the party realize that their actions have consequences. Second, it definitely added excitement to it, and it made them start thinking, oh my goodness, this was the gnolls that this has to do with those gnolls that we had killed way back then. And now, another thing it did is it made them realize that, hey, wait a minute, if this search party came looking for us, then there's more of them out there. It made it a little interesting and added a little more flavor to the campaign and a little more sense of urgency, and makes them realize again that their actions have consequences, and that's a very important thing in a living, breathing world. Another good tip is to make sure you are awarding your players from time to time for random encounters. I know a lot of these random encounters, there aren't any treasure or anything involved in them, but if they do have some good combat encounters, make sure you do throw a little bit of gold at them. And if it's a verbal encounter, make sure you're giving out clues or information that the party may need, maybe directions to a certain place they're looking for that they're having trouble finding. Again, I wouldn't do it with every single encounter, but it's good to do it occasionally. And the last suggestion I have, and this applies especially to new DMs, use the books. The Dungeon Master Guide actually does have a section in there regarding random encounters. It kind of goes over an outline of what they are and how they work, and it even has charts and tables on setting up random encounters in certain areas. So use the books. They can be very useful, very helpful. That's what they're there for. They are the source books. Alright, well, as you can see, I love discussing random encounters, and this is something that I could go on at length about, but that's it for today's video. So I hope you got some useful information out of it. If you did, and if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and click that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned for more videos to come. Thanks.